I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Bronchopulmonary dysplasia is a condition that affects preterm infants, especially those born with underdeveloped lungs who require prolonged oxygen therapy or mechanical ventilation to help them breathe after birth. It's characterized by damage and abnormal development of the lung tissue and airways, often resulting from life-saving interventions necessary for babies born very prematurely. Airway Therapeutics is developing a new class of biologics for respiratory and inflammatory diseases, starting with bronchopulmonary dysplasia. We spoke to Marc Salzberg, CEO of Airway Therapeutics, about the company's experimental therapy, zelpultide alfa, why it's a pipeline in a product, and its development path forward. Marc, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about inflammatory lung disease, Airway Therapeutics, and its efforts to bring a novel biologic to treat a variety of conditions, starting with bronchopulmonary dysplasia, or BPD, a condition that affects preterm infants. What causes BPD?
BPD is essentially caused by the requirement of ventilation and oxygenation that leads to lung injury. And that lung injury causes inflammation, and the inflammation causes further lung injury. And on top of that, secondary infections basically finishes the vicious cycle in which these babies enter. And because of that vicious cycle of lung injury, inflammation, secondary infection, they need even more ventilation and oxygenation, which deteriorates the situation further.
And what happens to the lungs in BPD, and are there long-term consequences of having this condition?
Yeah, so what happens to the lung is through that lung injury, the lung cells get destroyed and the tissue gets destroyed. That reduces the lung function and makes it more difficult for those babies that have BPD to breathe, hence the requirement for more ventilation and oxygenation. The long-term consequences of that are predominantly the consequence of lung development that arrests during that time of inflammation. These preterm born babies are born in a stage where not all the little airbags, the alveoli, are formed. If the lung is inflamed and injured, that further development arrests. And the faster these babies come out of it, and the less severe the injury is, the faster they can come out of it, the higher is the likelihood they can catch up with the development of the lung. If they do not recover fast enough and fully, then the lung will never really fully develop. That means they might have a reduced number of alveoli, the gas-blood exchange is reduced, and the consequence of that is repetitive pneumonias that might require hospitalizations, an increased incidence of asthma, other respiratory consequences, and also consequences to the development of neurological symptoms. So the neurodevelopment is basically impacted. Jeff Witzet, who's one of the fathers of lung development research, stated once that babies that have severe BPD never really fully exploit their intellectual potential.
How is the condition typically diagnosed and treated?
Well, it's diagnosed, and the disease is really defined as the requirement for ventilation and oxygenation in week 36 post-menstruational age, which means that a baby born, say, week 26, that for that baby, that's been diagnosed 14 weeks into life. And at that point, one assesses first, is a baby intubated, yes or no? And does the baby get mechanical ventilation or maybe superficial ventilation? If any of those boxes are ticked yes, then the baby has BPD. And within the intensity of ventilation, there's a grading system. Grade 1 meaning very superficial ventilation. Grade 3, that's mechanical ventilation, more invasive, more damaging to the lung. And that is actually why grade 3 BPD, the more severe form of BPD with a more intensive ventilation, leads to longer and more consequences, more long-term consequences and short-term consequences. So that's the diagnosed part. The treatment is unfortunately insufficient today. There is no registered prevention or treatment for BPD available. Physicians try all kind of interventions that hopefully helps the baby breathe better, like caffeine. Vitamin A is tried, steroids are tried, but there is no established proven treatment or prevention for BPD today available.
You're developing an experimental therapy, zelpultide alfa, which is a recombinant human protein, as a potential treatment for BPD and other inflammatory lung conditions. Why start with BPD, which is an orphan indication?
That's a great question. So there's multiple answers to that. Answer number one is, as I said before, the babies are born with not yet fully developed lung. While zelpultide alfa or recombinant human surfactant protein D as an immune modulator that reduces inflammation and clears infections could help in a variety of indications. BPD is the only indication we are aware of where we're not only helping to reduce the inflammation and through that cure the disease or prevent the disease, but we're also enabling the baby to have a normal life afterwards, and prevent that the lung remains underdeveloped, and that underdevelopment leads to short and long-term consequences that might be irreversible. So the impact of BPD, again, a condition that cannot be treated today, and that was another reason, there is nothing out there. The medical need is enormous. Um, and so those were reasons for why we target BPD first. The other reason is the research for lung development and the role of SPD in lung development originates to some extent from Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And so there was kind of a legacy to take that research and make it to the benefit of those patients, of those preterm born babies coming out of that clinic that discovered the role of SPD. In the meantime, groups around the world actually worked on SPD and found also that a number of adult conditions go along with low levels of SPD, and that adding back of that protein improves the outcome. So again, BPD is the beginning of the journey, but for sure it's going to be a long journey with the development in a number of indications.
Before we talk about your experimental therapy, I think it'd be useful if you could explain what surfactant proteins are and the role they play in respiratory health.
Right. So there's four surfactant proteins, A, B, C, and D. Today, commercial products contain surfactant protein B and C, that are predominantly formed out of lipids and help to reduce the surface tension of the alveoli, which results in an easier way to breathe for the babies, to inflate and deflate the lungs. That actually had a big impact on survival, and those drugs were introduced early 90s. Surfactant protein D, though, has a different purpose. It has as I said before, immune modulation leading to anti-inflammation and clearance of infection as a main purpose. It's kind of a immune police in the lung, and that could not yet be produced. And we're the only company, as far as we know, that can produce a full-length surfactant protein D, our zelpultide alfa. And the function really is reduction of inflammation and infection. It also actually supports the recycling mechanisms of all the surfactants, and by that helps to sustain a concentration of all the surfactants in the lungs. So in that sense, surfactant protein D also supports B and C in its function. The role of surfactant protein A is still being researched and not yet fully validated and valued in its impact on pathomechanisms of potential conditions.
Airway Therapeutics is a 2011 spinout from Cincinnati Children's Hospital medical sector, where they were doing work on surfactant proteins in newborns. Did Airway Therapeutics discover zelpultide alfa, or was it formed to develop the?
Well, Cincinnati Children's and Professor Jeff Whitsett and his group researched the role of surfactant protein D, and as a consequence of that research and research from groups around the world, it became clear that a replacement therapy of surfactant protein D for conditions where that surfactant protein D is low makes sense. Out of that thought, Airway Therapeutics really was born as a company that takes it as its mission to find a way to produce surfactant protein D for use in humans, and then test it non-clinically and clinically for its validity as a replacement therapy for a number of conditions. So it's really Airway Therapeutics that took a discovery and made it a drug development project, which it is right now.
And what is zelpultide alfa, and how does it work?
Zelpultide alfa is the recombinant human version of surfactant protein D, which means it's being produced through a biotech process in bioreactors with a cell line that produces the protein, and then it's being purified. And it looks exactly like the the endogenous surfactant protein D with a slight modification. And it does what the innate surfactant protein D is doing, namely the immune modulation, the reduction of inflammation, and the binding of microbes, and then clearance of infections. It's essentially a replacement therapy. You can think of it like producing insulin for patients with diabetes that lack insulin.
And how is it administered? Is this inhalable?
For the purpose of bronchopulmonary dysplasia, we administer it intratracheally through an intratracheal tube. Those babies are intubated, so that's how they get it, and that's how most of the drug makes its way directly into the lungs. However, the formulation we have developed also allows for inhalation, nebulization, and for a number of other indications, we are working on that type of administration along the lines of SPD, surfactant protein D, and zelpultide alfa, working also as an anti-inflammatory systemically. We might think also of systemic administrations down the line of development.
And is the expectation that this would be used to treat BPD, or is there potential here to use it as a prophylactic?
It's actually as a prophylactic. We are hoping to prevent BPD for all those babies that are at high risk to develop BPD. And those are essentially babies born very early. Our pivotal study that we are about to start looks at babies born week 22 to just below 28.
And what's known about its safety and efficacy from work you've done to date?
We have tested zelpultide alfa in non-clinical experiments, in classical toxicity experiments, and have seen a very well-tolerated and safe drug. We brought it then into clinic and ran a phase 1 study in very preterm born babies, and the good safety and tolerability profile has been confirmed in that study. To date, there were no so-called dose-limiting toxicities observed, and now we're moving directly into a pivotal study based on these favorable profiles. In particular, besides the good safety profile, we have seen in that early study that we did a number of signs and trends towards promising efficacy. And that is what we are aiming now to confirm. And if that will be confirmed, we expect zelpultide alfa to be the first drug on the market for BPD ever. And that would be a paradigm shift in managing those preterm born babies.
Given that this is being used prophylactically, how big a group of infants will you need to enroll?
We are looking at the study that will enroll a bit over 300 babies in a randomized fashion. First, we are looking at the lower dose and the higher dose and the control arm with placebo. And then we pick the optimal dose, looking at the safety risk benefit profile, basically, and then compare that dose again with placebo with the control arm. So we're looking at a total of about 300 to 320 patients.
So you mentioned you're looking at this for a range of indications, including ARDS, COVID, asthma, COPD, and CAP. Is this a pipeline and a product, or are you exploring other potential therapies for development?
Well, it's for sure a pipeline and a product because of its immune modulatory effect and the focus on inhibiting inflammation and on clearing infections, which is such a big problem. This novel approach of doing that offers the possibility to physicians and patients to hopefully use a drug with a different mechanism of action that can bring the fight against inflammatory conditions in the lungs, but potentially also outside the lungs, and to fight infections in the lungs with a new option next to steroids with its known side effects, next to antibiotics with its limitations and resistance and others. So we believe with this novel way of modulating the immune response and reducing inflammation and infection with a protein that actually the body typically has produced itself and is just low in certain conditions because the lung cells cannot produce it anymore once the cell is injured and inflamed, offers a huge opportunity for a number of conditions, which is why we believe this is a pipeline in itself. It's a true treatment platform. And whether we're then going to go down and explore other potential therapies for development is a question that we need to answer later. At the moment, our focus is exclusively on zelpultide alfa.
You mentioned this is one of 4 surfactant proteins. Is there thoughts that the others might have therapeutic benefits as well?
Well, surfactant protein B and C, they have their benefits as they are already being used to reduce the surface tension, as I said, and help babies in particular breathe easier. They don't seem to have any applications outside that patient population, though. Whether surfactant protein A at some stage will be used for any of those conditions and remains to be seen. But our focus is on surfactant protein D. That's very well researched in the meantime, with way over 100 publications confirming its role, its mechanism of action, and actually the simple science behind the replacement therapy. That makes it, we believe, a very attractive novel drug with a clear pathway.
The company has raised $100 million to date. How far will existing cash take you, and what's the plan for raising additional capital?
We are now working on the pivotal trial with this money. We are also in the process currently of raising additional capital, partially for the current research in BPD, and then also for the scaling of manufacturing in preparation for market entry and in preparation for a full development for adult indications that will require more drug supply and will hence need more capital.
And is the expectation that you would commercialize this on your own, or are you looking to find a partner to do that?
That's a great question. We believe that we can commercialize the BPD indication ourselves. It's a very limited number of centers that treat these high-risk babies. In the US, you're looking maybe at 300 hospitals that cover 70% of the patient population. In Europe, the equivalent, distributed over a number of countries, though. So you don't really need a huge sales force to commercialize a drug in those two areas of the world. But then also we need to look at other countries, at Asia, Africa, Australia. But we would be also interested in looking into partnerships on one hand for the BPD commercialization, but also for the development of some of the pipeline indications that are huge, like COPD, asthma, severe pneumonia. And as a small company, we will not be able to develop this drug and all these indications in a time-efficient way. So therefore, we would look at the partnership and hopefully co-develop this drug over time.
Marc Salzberg, President, CEO, and Chief Medical Officer of Airway Therapeutics. Marc, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.